Hey, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Good to have you here as always. So tonight, I'm talking about comparisons between white power skinhead movements in New Zealand and a little bit of Australia and black power and mongrel mob in New Zealand, because I've had a lot of comments like this. And you see it all the time. I hear it all the time. The black power are just as bad. Why don't you talk about the black racists? And it's usually said by people who don't want to look too closely at what white supremacy really is or what it really does. But it got me thinking, maybe it is time to talk about it. Not just to respond to the noise, but to actually lay it all out. Because if you've lived through both sides like I have, the difference is night and day. Let's start with where these groups actually came from. So in New Zealand, the white power movement didn't grow out of poverty or community neglect. It didn't rise to protect vulnerable people. It grew out of prison hate groups and imported neo-Nazi ideology. Yeah, groups like Unit 88, Fourth Reich, and others that came up in the early 90s, and they weren't born out of local struggle. They were copies of overseas white supremacist movements, swastikas, salutes, shaved heads, all of it. And their entire ideology was built on racial purity and hatred. Not just against Māori, but also against immigrants, Asians, Muslims, hell, even against other white people who didn't toe the racist line. If you weren't white and racist, you were the enemy. Now contrast that with how the mongrel mob and black power started. Now the mongrel mob came first, way back in the early 60s in the Hawke's Bay. Ironically, it was actually founded by mostly Pakeha boys back then, but by the late 70s, it had become predominantly Māori and Pacifica. Now, Black Power was formed in 1970, originally called the Black Bulls, started by Ritu Harris, and unlike the white supremacists, they weren't inspired by overseas hate groups. They were inspired by resistance. They looked to the American civil rights movement and said, we need to stand up too. Now, these Māori gangs didn't come from hate. They came from intergenerational trauma, from poverty, racism, broken homes, and broken systems. And yeah, they were violent, but that violence came from being pushed down for too long. And when they fought back, they weren't doing it because someone was white. They were doing it because they were hurting. Now, I've been on both sides of this. I saw it up close. In the early days, I was around skinheads, and all I ever saw was racism. Pure, blatant, open racism. Everything they said, every angry outburst, every joke or speech, it was all directed at anyone who wasn't white. Later, when I was deep involved with the Australian scene, it was the same thing. I had to learn to become racist to fit in. Even when members tried to clean it up for public image, say they were just patriots or protecting the white race, underneath it was all nothing but hatred. And it wasn't just about other races. We didn't accept any white people who weren't racist. If you weren't racially aware, you're a problem. It was dressed up as nationalism, patriotism, but it was really just self-hatred repackaged as pride. Now, I used to justify my own hate by pointing to my past. I told myself I had a reason. My mother had been beaten by her Māori boyfriend in front of me. That I thought was my entry point to hate. But looking back, he didn't beat her because she was white. He beat her up because he was an arsehole. Now, I grew up around Māori and Cook Islander men. My mother had many partners from those communities, and they accepted us white kids. There was no racism. They were just people like anyone else. Now, I've heard a lot of stories over the years about why people turned racist, and most of the time it came down to trauma, anger, or abuse in their own families, even at the hands of their white parents. So why didn't they hate white people then? Because hate isn't rational, it's redirected pain. And for a lot of these white kids, especially back then, there weren't too many places to belong and to further fuel that hatred. You couldn't just join the Black Power mongrel mob, not unless you proved yourself and earned their trust. But if you were angry, white, and wanted to belong, they were the skinhead gangs. They were always willing to take you in. Back in the 80s and 90s, gangs did rule the streets. And yeah, Black Power and mongrel mob were a big part of that scene. But so were the skinheads. Here's the difference. Black Power and mongrel mob might have looked intimidating, but their targets were usually their rivals. People who posed a threat or people they had beef with, like other gangs. Now the white power gangs, they'd attack anyone different. Māori, Islanders, Asians, even white people if they didn't fall in line. It wasn't about protection. It was about the violence and fear. And as that Nazi ideology crept into the groups, so did the extreme violence. Many of the early New Zealand skinheads weren't even racist, but once that ideology took hold, it became all about it. Now, I've heard so many claim that they were just protecting their own, that they opposed immigration because it was taking their jobs. But I knew these guys, most were unemployed, chasing an easy criminal life, dealing drugs. But some had good families, and some of them even went to private schools. So it was all just a front, a way to justify being violent and lazy. And what did they actually do for their own people? Nothing. There were no support networks, no food drives, no youth work. The only thing they ever organised were concerts, and that was to spread their hate through music, not to raise money, not to build community. Now, when I was in Australia, I suggested doing charity work once, help out flood victims in Brisbane, because we were all sitting around watching the footage of the locals doing the cleanup. And there were some black locals in there. One of the prospects made a snide comment that actually disgusted me, and I turned and said to him, "Man, you're lucky I don't order you to go and help them out." And later on, I donated to that fund because that disgusted me. But it was a simple fact that even suggesting something good like that was just not going to happen. And meanwhile, you look at Mongrel Mob and Black Power, and as much as people love to paint them all with one brush, they've actually done a hell of a lot for their communities. So Black Power, especially early on, worked with lawyers like Bill Maung and activists like Dennis O'Reilly. They even met with Prime Minister Robert Muldoon back in the day to secure housing and work trusts for their members. And that's political engagement. That's not hate. Now, there have been chapters running addiction recovery programs, suicide prevention, welfare support, even funeral assistance, not just for gang members, for whole whānau and neighbourhoods. And there's a reason why ex-leaders of the mob have been able to turn their lives around and help others do the same. Read True Red. These are people confronting their past and working towards something better. Now, I actually remember tattooing the president of Mongrel Kaha in Christchurch in my early days. Now, he loved my work and he actually brought some of his members in to get tattooed by me too. Not once did I ever feel racism from them. They were respectful. And they actually gave me the honour to tattoo one of their patches on one of their members, on his throat. And that kind of trust doesn't come easily, especially for a white boy, and especially from a gang that's supposed to be racist. And you compare that to the skinheads I knew, they wouldn't even let a non-white person cook their food, let alone touch them with a tattoo needle. They wouldn't shake hands with anyone who wasn't white. Now, meanwhile, every Mongrel Mob member or Black Power member I have ever met shook my hand and looked me in the eye because I showed them the same respect, and that was even when I was a hammerskin. Some people claim that these Māori gangs have never done anything for their communities. Now, that's bullshit. And then others throw around nonsense like white kids aren't the ones committing racial assaults. Just look at the stats. Again, bullshit. Those numbers are twisted. They ignore the power dynamics, the history, and the state response. In 2024, New Zealand passed a law banning display of gang patches in public. It targeted groups like Mongrel Mob and Black Power. 67 gangs were listed, but guess what wasn't banned? Swastikas, white supremacist insignia, they weren't included. Why? Because these groups are small, fringe, and most importantly, not brown. It's a clear example of how the system still picks who to punish based on race. At the end of the day, it all comes down to this. White power movements were never about protection. They were about hate. They didn't build anything. They didn't preserve anything, and they didn't uplift anyone. They tore down, isolated, and destroyed even their own people. So Māori gangs, they're complicated. Violent, yes, but born from pain, not hate. And in many cases, I've tried to rebuild and tried to give back. So if you've lived on both sides, it's easy to see where the real difference lies. One group fights for survival, the other one fights because it hates the idea of anyone surviving. And that's the truth. So there you go. That's my comparisons based on my insights and my opinions of the difference between these movements. Now, if you've got your own opinions of it, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. Please keep it respectful though, because there's no place for hate in this world. Keep it positive and keep the love, because that's what it's all about. Thank you so much for being here, and if you want to keep seeing more videos like me, many different ways, liking, subscribing, and hitting the bell to get notified. You'll be seeing new videos from me every week. There's also memberships available on the channel. That unlocks a lot of perks, like a lot of members videos, well worth checking out. But you can also help out this channel by donating. Yeah, coffee donations, PayPal donations, all that stuff. It all goes towards supporting the channel and allowing me to make these videos for you all. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here. I'll see you next week. Peace out and love and light to all.